On that cold New York City corner, with steam rising from the subway grates and sirens cutting through the night, Selena Gomez got into my cab like someone trying to fly under the radar in a world that knows her face too well. She had the type of beauty every billboard tries to copy, but what grabbed my attention wasn't the glow. It was the exhaustion hidden behind her eyes, the demeanor of someone who's already heard too many cheers and is still fighting to hear her own voice in the silence. Right there, between the noise of the cars and the white light of the mirrored skyscrapers, wasn't the star of the stage, the awards, the red carpets. It was a woman full of scars that don't show up in photos, scars that not even the world's best makeup artist could cover up. Have you ever noticed how the world teaches you to hide everything that hurts, as if weakness were a crime and vulnerability were shameful? That night, locked inside an ordinary taxi in a city that never stops, Selena broke that unwritten rule and did the exact opposite. Instead of posing, she dropped her defenses. Instead of a canned response, raw truth emerged. Instead of a performance came a confession. And what started as just another fare turned into one of those encounters that don't fit into stories, that don't boil down to a headline, but that can become a turning point in the life of anyone who listens until the end. Because when a woman the whole world looks up to decides to talk about her own invisible scars, it's impossible to leave the conversation unchanged. On that cold night in New York, light rain was hitting the windshield when the taxi's back door suddenly opened. Selena got in fast, pulling her jacket hood over her head and adjusting her sunglasses, even though it was already dark out. From a distance, anyone would just see the famous star, well-dressed, expensive perfume, impeccable posture. But up close, you could notice the slumped shoulders, the slightly heavy breathing, and the look of someone who had just left a medical building carrying more than just papers in the white envelope she held against her chest. The sound of horns outside contrasted sharply with the heavy silence she brought into the car. She mumbled the address softly, almost in a whisper, and I started the engine. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw her slowly remove her glasses, revealing tired, reddish eyes. Her hands trembled slightly as she tucked the envelope into her purse, as if she were hiding a secret that weighed too heavily. It wasn't the first time I'd seen a famous person in my cab. New York is just like that, full of known faces trying to be anonymous for a few minutes. But there was something different about her that night. It wasn't just exhaustion. It was something deeper, more urgent, as if she were carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders and needed a safe place to breathe. As the cab cut through Times Square, the neon lights flashed on her face through the glass. People rushed past on the sidewalk, some looking at the car, trying to figure out who was inside. Selena noticed and pulled her hood back up, shielding herself from curious eyes. "Have you ever noticed how everyone wants to see us but nobody truly sees us?" she suddenly asked, breaking the silence. Her voice was raspy, laden with a sadness the cameras never capture. I stayed quiet, waiting. Sometimes people just need someone to listen, not someone to answer. She rested her head against the cold window glass and closed her eyes for a few seconds. The city noise, sirens, engines, voices, seemed distant to her, as if she were in a bubble separate from reality. "I just came from another doctor's appointment," she continued without opening her eyes. "More tests, more questions about how I'm feeling, more reminders that my body and my mind don't work the way they should." The sincerity of those words caught me off guard. There was one of the most admired people on the planet, talking about flaws, about limitations, about being human in a way no one ever sees on stage or social media. The cab stopped at a red light, and she finally opened her eyes, looking at the people crossing the crosswalk. "Every single one of them has their own invisible battles," she said quietly, more to herself than to me. "The difference is that with mine, everyone thinks they have the right to comment, to judge, to say whether they're real or not." There was a contained bitterness in those words, but also a weary resignation. The light turned green, and I drove on. But something told me that this conversation was just starting, and that what came next would change the way I looked at pain, fame, and healing forever. A few blocks later, Selena took a deep breath and broke the silence again. "Do you know what it's like to live in a body that betrays you?" she asked, turning slightly toward me. Waking up one day feeling invincible, ready to conquer the world, full of energy and ideas, and the next day not even being able to get out of bed because everything feels meaningless. She paused, biting her lower lip. For the longest time, I thought that was just how life was. Ups and downs. Nobody told me this had a name, that it was a condition, that it needed treatment. The cab crept slowly down the gridlocked avenue, and the lights of the buildings reflected on her face like neon tears. She recounted that the first signs started in her teens, but everyone attributed them to the pressures of fame, the stress of the shows, the demands of the industry. I was 17 years old and already on a world tour, she said, looking at her hands. There were days I went on stage and felt like a goddess. I sang, I danced, I smiled at thousands of people and thought I could do anything. But there were other nights when I cried in the dressing room before the show, shaking, heart racing, thinking I was going to pass out. She shook her head slowly. And I just went on stage anyway, because the show couldn't stop. The machine couldn't stop. The scariest thing, she explained, was not understanding what was happening. I used to think, why am I like this? Why can't I be consistent like everyone else? Why do I love everything one day and hate even breathing the next? Her voice grew lower, almost a whisper. Nobody teaches you that the mind can get sick just like the body gets sick. Nobody prepares you to wake up and not recognize the person you see in the mirror. She ran her hand through her hair nervously. I thought it was weakness. I thought if I just tried harder, if I was stronger, more disciplined, it would go away. Outside, the city maintained its frantic pace, oblivious to the silent breakdown happening in so many lives simultaneously. It wasn't until she was 25 years old that she finally received the diagnosis, bipolar disorder. When the doctor said it, I felt a strange relief, she revealed, because finally, it had a name. It wasn't me just being dramatic. It wasn't a lack of gratitude for the life I had. It was a real condition with a scientific explanation, with treatment. She sighed deeply. But at the same time, I felt a paralyzing fear, because now I knew this wasn't going away. I was going to have to live with it for the rest of my life. The cab turned left, and the sound of an ambulance siren in the distance seemed to echo the urgency of those words. Selena looked out the window and saw a couple laughing on the sidewalk, completely oblivious to the world around them. The loneliest part of all this is realizing that life goes on out there, regardless of the chaos happening inside you, she said. Her voice weighted with an old melancholy. People go to work, go out to dinner, make weekend plans, and you're stuck there, trapped on an emotional roller coaster you never asked to ride. She crossed her arms as if protecting herself from a cold that didn't come from outside, but from within. And I knew that behind that diagnosis, there was an even deeper story waiting to be told. The cab was traveling down Park Avenue when Selena lightly touched the side of her neck, where there was an almost imperceptible scar. Before the bipolar disorder diagnosis, another one came, she said, her voice growing tenser. Lupus. I was 21 years old, and my body started attacking itself from the inside out. She looked at her own hands as if they were strangers. Joint pain, extreme fatigue, swelling, unexplained fever. There were days I couldn't get out of bed, not because of an emotional issue, but because physically my body just wouldn't respond. The sound of traffic outside seemed distant as she revisited those painful memories. And the worst part? Nobody saw it. There was no cast, no wheelchair, no nothing visible to justify my pain. She talked about the weeks she spent hospitalized, connected to tubes and machines, while doctors tried to control the disease attacking her kidneys. Lupus isn't like a cold that goes away in a few days, she explained. It's a chronic autoimmune disease. My own immune system was destroying me, confusing healthy cells with invaders. The irony was brutal. While millions of fans saw her as a symbol of strength and beauty, her body was at war with itself. I remember staring at the white hospital ceiling at 3 o'clock in the morning, listening to the machines beeping and thinking, is this real? Am I going to die young? The fear was etched into those words like an invisible tattoo. The kidney transplant was unavoidable. Selena closed her eyes when she spoke about it, as if the mere memory still hurt. My best friend donated a kidney to me. she said, her voice cracking a little. "She literally gave me a part of herself so I could stay alive. How do you thank someone for something like that? How do you keep living knowing someone sacrificed for you?" The gratitude was mixed with heavy guilt, that kind of feeling that doesn't have an easy solution. And even after the surgery, the recovery was brutal. Scars, pain, medications that make you puffy, that change your face, your body. Everything the entertainment industry judges so relentlessly. She mentioned how she rushed back into the spotlight too quickly, pressured by contracts, expectations, and the relentless machine of fame. "I could barely walk straight, and I was already in meetings, recordings, interviews," she revealed bitterly. Makeup hid the paleness. Strategic clothes hid the swelling. Forced smiles hid the exhaustion. Outside, pedestrians hurried past, each living their own invisible battles. People saw the Selena from the stage, from the magazine cover. But nobody saw the Selena who took 10 pills a day just so her body wouldn't reject the organ keeping her alive. The fragility of those words contrasted with the public image of invincibility the world demanded of her. The cab stopped at another red light, and Selena leaned her forehead against the cold glass. "Do you know the truth about invisible illnesses?" she asked rhetorically. "People only believe you when you are literally falling apart. When you can still smile, walk, work, they think you're exaggerating, attention-seeking." The frustration was palpable. "I could be running a fever, in unbearable pain, barely breathing, but if I posted a picture smiling, people would say she doesn't look sick." And as the city continued its chaotic dance of lights and noise, I realized there were even deeper layers to that story, connecting body and mind in ways most people would never need to understand. The cab turned onto a quieter street, away from the chaos of Times Square, and Selena kept talking. "There's a cruel irony in being famous and feeling completely alone at the same time," she said, looking at the illuminated buildings. "I can be at a show with 50,000 people screaming my name, singing every word along with me, and still feel isolated, like I'm behind thick glass that no one can get through." Her voice carried the weight of someone who lived that contradiction for years. People think fame is synonymous with happiness, with fulfillment, but no one prepares you for the emptiness that comes with the applause. She described nights when she finished a show exhausted, returned to the hotel, and had panic attacks locked in the bathroom. My heart raced. My breathing failed. I broke out in a cold sweat, and I was sure I was going to die right there, she recounted with painful detail. And there was nobody to help, just me, the mirror, and that paralyzing terror. The contrast was brutal. Outside, thousands of people posted on social media about how incredible the show had been, how perfect she was. Inside, she was collapsing alone. And the next day, I had to wake up, put on the mask, and do it all over again, because the tour doesn't stop. The commitments don't stop. The machine needs fuel, and the fuel is you. The prejudice regarding mental health was another weight she carried. When you're public and you admit you have psychological problems, people put you in a box, she explained with frustration. You become the troubled celebrity, the one who can't handle the pressure, the weak one, as if admitting vulnerability were shameful, as if seeking help were a defect. She squeezed her purse tightly. I saw comments saying I was dramatic, that I was attention-seeking, that I should be grateful for the privileged life I had, as if money and fame could cure depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder. The contained anger in those words was palpable, but it was mixed with resigned sadness. Selena talked about the constant pressure to always look fine, always happy, always grateful. The entertainment industry has no room for weakness, she said. If you cancel a show because you're physically sick, people understand. But if you cancel because you're having a mental breakdown, you're lazy, unprofessional, spoiled. She shook her head, incredulous. I even performed shows with a fever of 104 degrees Fahrenheit because I was afraid of disappointing people, of losing contracts, of being seen as troubled. The sound of a horn outside briefly interrupted the silence that followed. And the saddest part? I wasn't alone in this. So many artists live in this silent hell, dying inside while performing perfection outside. The cab stopped at a traffic light, and a group of young people passed by the crosswalk laughing loudly, seemingly without a care. Selena watched them with a mix of nostalgia and sadness. I wish I could be like that again, she murmured. Light, carefree, without carrying the weight of millions of expectations on my back. She turned to me, and for the first time that night, her eyes met mine through the rearview mirror. But the truth is, when you go public, you stop owning yourself. You become collective property. And when that property breaks, nobody wants to deal with the pieces. And in that instant, I knew there were even more layers of pain waiting to be revealed. Layers that the internet and social media only amplified. The conversation took an even darker turn when Selena took her phone from her purse and stared at the dark screen, as if she were facing an enemy. This thing right here, she said, holding up the device, was one of the worst things that happened to my generation, and also one of the best. It's a double-edged sword that cuts you slowly, every single day, until you don't even realize you're bleeding anymore. She swiped her finger across the screen but didn't open any app. Social media seemed innocent at first, a way to connect with fans, share moments, but they quickly turned into a public courthouse where every photo, every word, every breath is judged by millions of people who don't know you. Selena described how the vicious cycle started. She would post a photo, and in seconds, thousands of comments would appear. 99% might be positive, but it was the 1% negative that stuck in my mind, she confessed. Comments about my weight, my skin, my hair, my body. People saying I was fat, that I was ugly, that I looked sick, that I should get plastic surgery. She paused, her voice trembling. And the worst part? I started to believe it. I looked in the mirror and saw exactly what those strangers were saying. I didn't see myself anymore. I saw a collection of flaws waiting to be fixed. The light from a passing streetlight illuminated her face, revealing the pain of that memory. The habit of comparing herself to other celebrities turned into an obsession. I would open Instagram and see other artists with perfect bodies, flawless skin, seemingly perfect lives, she recounted. And even knowing it was all edited, filtered, staged, I still felt inferior. Why couldn't I be like that? Why was my body swelling because of the medicine? Why did my skin have lupus blemishes? She rubbed her face with her hands. I forgot that those women also had their battles, their insecurities. I only saw the perfect version they chose to show, and I hated myself for not being able to achieve that. The cab turned a corner, and the sound of distant music coming from a bar seemed like a cruel contrast to her sadness. The panic attacks started getting worse. There was a time when I couldn't even pick up the phone, Selena admitted. Just thinking about opening social media, my heart would race. Cold sweats, trembling, the feeling that the world was collapsing. I spent days locked in my room, curtains drawn, phone off, isolating myself from everyone. She described those moments in painful detail, days without showering, without eating properly, without responding to messages. People outside thought I was on vacation, enjoying life, but the truth is I was fighting just to keep breathing, to not give up on everything. The vulnerability of those words was raw, unfiltered, unedited. Selena finally deleted social media from her phone for months. It was the best and scariest decision I ever made, she said. Best because I could finally breathe, stop comparing myself, stop feeding that monster of external validation. But scary because in the entertainment industry, if you're not present on social media, it's like you don't exist. She looked out the window and saw a young person sitting alone on a park bench, glued to their phone screen, oblivious to the world around them. How many people are living in this same prison right now? She asked. How many are silently destroying themselves, thinking they need to be perfect to be loved? And I knew she would soon tell me about the moment when everything hit its limit, when her mind finally said enough is enough. The cab drove slowly through the city when Selena took a deep breath, as if preparing to recount something she rarely shared. There was a point when everything exploded, she began, her voice growing quieter. I was in my early 20s, at the peak of my career, but my mind was literally shattering. It wasn't just sadness or anxiety, it was something much scarier. She pressed her hands together. I started having episodes where I completely lost touch with reality. I heard things that weren't there. I saw shadows moving. My head was flooded with thoughts that wouldn't stop, millions of ideas all at once, all screaming for attention. The sound of the windshield wiper slicing through the light rain created a hypnotic rhythm as she revisited that personal hell. She recounted the night when everything completely fell apart. I was in a hotel after an event, and suddenly I felt like I was being watched, being followed, that there were hidden cameras, that people wanted to hurt me. Paranoia had completely taken over. I locked the door, piled furniture against it, turned off all the lights, and stayed huddled in the corner of the room, shaking, crying, unable to distinguish what was real from what my mind was creating. Her voice nearly vanished as she recalled it. My assistant found me hours later. I didn't respond when she spoke to me. I was completely disconnected, lost in a mental labyrinth with no way out. The pain of that memory was stamped on every single word. Hospitalization was unavoidable and urgent. They took me to a specialized psychiatric facility, Selena revealed without mincing words. And for the first time in my life, I was in a place where it didn't matter if I was famous, had money, or fans. My mind was broken and I needed immediate professional help. She described the first few weeks: heavy medication to stabilize, intensive therapy, moments of clarity mixed with total confusion. There were days when I didn't know where I was, who I was, why I was there. Other days, the clarity returned, and I felt overwhelming shame. How had I reached that point? How could a mind betray you that much? The cab stopped at a light, and the silence inside the car was heavy as concrete. But it was during that hospitalization that something changed. For the first time, someone taught me to name my pain, she said with a different, almost relieved tone. It wasn't just being sad or being stressed. It was a manic episode. It was deep depression. It was psychosis. It had a name. It had a scientific explanation. It had treatment. She explained how learning the correct language to describe what she was feeling was liberating. When you can name the monster, it loses some of its power over you. You realize you're not crazy. You're sick. And sickness has treatment, management, hope. Her eyes shone with a determination that hadn't been there before. I left that facility different. Not cured, but armed with tools I'd never had before. Selena looked at me and asked, "Do you know what the biggest lesson from that episode was?" I nodded, waiting. That sometimes hitting rock bottom is necessary for you to finally decide to climb up. As long as you're halfway there, balancing between collapse and functionality, you keep pushing, pretending, surviving. But when you completely fall, when there's nowhere left to go but up, that's when the real transformation begins. The cab started moving again, and with it, the narrative continued toward what would come next. The daily battle not to return to that abyss ever again. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still wet, reflecting the city lights like liquid mirrors. Selena adjusted her posture in the seat and continued. After you have a breakdown like that, a new fear appears. A fear that never completely goes away, she said. It's the fear of relapse, of going back to that dark place where you almost completely lost yourself. She described how she woke up every day with that feeling in her chest, that silent question. Is today the day everything falls apart again? You learn to live with it, but it never disappears. It's like walking a tightrope every day, knowing that one wrong step can throw you into the abyss. The medication routine became an inseparable part of her life. I take medicine in the morning, in the afternoon, at night. Mood stabilizers, antipsychotics, immunosuppressants because of the transplant, she listed emotionlessly, like someone reciting something automatic. There are days I look at that pile of pills and think, this is what keeps me functioning. It's not willpower. It's not positive thinking. It's chemical substances balancing my brain so I don't collapse. She paused. And people romanticize the idea of beating depression naturally, of being strong enough not to need meds, as if taking medication were a weakness. But the truth is, without those pills, I probably wouldn't be here today. Maintaining strict routines became a matter of survival. I need to sleep 8 hours. It's not a luxury, it's a medical necessity, she explained. I need to go to therapy every single week, no exceptions. I need to avoid alcohol, drugs, extreme stress situations. I need moments of silence, of disconnection, of breathing room. She shook her head. But the entertainment industry doesn't work that way. They want you to be available 24 hours a day, to accept every invitation, to travel constantly, to sleep 3 hours, and wake up ready to film. Saying no became my most important word, and also the hardest one. The cab passed a group of young people leaving a bar, laughing loudly, seemingly unconcerned about mental health or personal boundaries. Setting boundaries at work came at a high cost. I lost contracts, opportunities, movie roles because I said I couldn't meet that insane schedule, Selena admitted. Producers were frustrated. Agents said I was throwing away my career. But I had to choose professional success or mental health. And after almost losing my life, the choice became obvious. She talked about tense meetings where she had to explain her limitations, where she was seen as difficult, troubled, unprofessional. But I learned that I'd rather be seen as complicated and be alive than be seen as easy and be dead. The firmness in that statement was unwavering. And you know what's saddest? That this is still the exception. So many artists continue destroying themselves because they're afraid to say no, to disappoint, to lose relevance. Selena looked at the envelope she had put in her purse earlier, the result of her recent doctor's appointment. Every appointment is a reminder that this battle never ends. Doctors adjust medications, monitor symptoms, check if the transplanted kidney is working, if her mood is stable, if there are no signs of relapse, she said tiredly. And there are days I just wish I could be normal, not have to think of every decision as a potential trigger for a crisis, not have to plan my life around medical limitations. She sighed deeply. But this is my reality, and the sooner I accepted that, the lighter it became to carry. And in that moment I realized she wasn't alone on this journey, that there were people and connections that made all the difference between surviving and truly living. The cab entered a wider avenue, and Selena picked up her phone again, but this time with a different look. Do you know what truly saved me? It wasn't just the meds, it wasn't only the therapy. It was realizing that I couldn't do this alone, she said, opening her photo gallery. She showed me a picture of her with 3 friends, all hugging, genuinely smiling. These women saw me at my worst, and they didn't run away. They held me when I was falling, reminded me who I was when I forgot, made me laugh when everything felt dull. Her voice grew softer. We really romanticize the idea of overcoming everything alone, of being strong enough not to need anyone. But that's a lie. Nobody heals alone. Nobody survives in isolation. She spoke about the friend who donated her kidney, but also about the others who were present in less obvious ways. One of them called me every day just to ask if I had eaten, if I had had water, if I had gotten out of bed, Selena recounted. It sounds simple, but when you're in deep depression, even those basic things feel impossible. And having someone remind you, without judgment, without pressure, makes all the difference. Another friend would simply show up at her house and sit silently next to her, watching silly movies, without expecting her to talk or explain anything. Sometimes, the silent presence of someone who loves you is more powerful than 1,000 motivational words. Therapy also became a fundamental pillar. I go to therapy every single week without fail, and it's not that thing where I go when I feel bad. It's a permanent commitment, she explained. My therapist taught me how to identify triggers, recognize patterns, and create strategies to handle difficult situations before they turn into crises. Selena talked about how, at first, she was ashamed to go to therapy, as if it were an admission of failure. But today I see it as maintenance. Just like you go to the dentist to take care of your teeth, you go to a therapist to take care of your mind. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it should be normal for everyone. The cab stopped at another light and she continued. And when people ask me, don't you ever get cured? I answer, healing isn't going back to who you were before. It's learning to live well with who you've become. She also mentioned support groups she attended. Sitting in a room with other people who understand exactly what you're going through is transformative, Selena said. You don't need to explain. You don't need to justify yourself. Everyone there knows what it's like to wake up and fight not to give up. What it's like to take medicine that makes you swell up and accept that this is the price of being alive. What it's like to deal with stigma, prejudice, loneliness. She talked about the stories of other people who inspired her, who showed that it's possible to live a fulfilling life even with chronic conditions. Seeing someone a few steps ahead on the journey gives you hope. It shows you that it's possible even on the hardest days. Selena put her phone away and looked at me. If there's one thing I'd want people to understand, it's this. Asking for help isn't weakness. Creating a support network isn't dependence. It's intelligence, it's survival, it's self-love, she stated with conviction. I know not everyone has access to expensive therapy, available friends, support groups, but some connection is possible. A free hotline, an online group, a family member who listens, anything is better than total isolation. The cab continued through the city, and I knew she would soon tell me about an encounter that would change not only her life, but also the lives of people she didn't even know. A moment of public vulnerability that would become a watershed moment. The cab was approaching Central Park when Selena pointed to the illuminated entrance. "That's where everything changed for me," she said, her eyes fixed on the landscape. "I was walking alone, wearing a cap and glasses, trying to be invisible. I just wanted to breathe, feel the grass, see the trees, escape a little from the pressure of being who everyone expected me to be." She described the day, cold but sunny, with few people in the park. "I was sitting on a bench, looking at the lake, when two girls approached me. They must have been about 15, 16 years old. They were nervous, looking at each other until one of them gathered the courage and said, 'Are you Selena?' The sound of the memories felt as vivid as the scene she was describing. Normally, Selena recounted, she would smile, take the photo quickly, and leave. But that day, something was different. Maybe because I was exhausted from pretending. Maybe because I felt those girls needed to hear something real, she explained. They talked. One of the girls was struggling with depression and anxiety, but was afraid to tell her parents. The other had just lost a friend to suicide and carried enormous guilt. I listened to their stories and saw my reflection there. I saw the girl I was when I was 15 years old, lost, scared, thinking I was alone in the world. Selena then did something she had never done before. She told her own story, without filters, without emotional makeup. She talked about bipolar disorder, about the hospitalization, about the days when she didn't want to live anymore. "I saw those girls' eyes fill up with tears," Selena related. But they weren't tears of pity. They were tears of recognition, of relief. Because finally, someone they admired was saying, "I go through this too. You're not alone. It's not just you." One of them asked if Selena thought she was weak for needing help. I held her hand and said, "Seeking help is the bravest thing you can do. Continuing to fight alone until you break, that's the crazy part." That encounter lasted almost 1 hour, right there on that Central Park bench, far from the cameras and the stages. When they left, Selena stayed seated longer, processing what had just happened. "I realized that hiding my struggle wasn't protecting anyone. In fact, it was contributing to the silence that kills," she said. How many people were suffering in silence thinking they were the only ones? How many lives could be saved if more people talked openly about mental health? She decided right there that she wouldn't hide anymore. A few days later, I made a post on social media talking openly about my diagnosis. My team was terrified, thinking it would ruin my image. But what happened was the opposite. Millions of messages poured in. People from all over the world sharing their own battles, thanking me for speaking up, saying they felt less alone, Selena recounted, her voice thick with emotion. Mothers saying they finally managed to talk to their children about depression. Young people saying they sought help after hearing me. People saying they abandoned suicide because they realized they weren't alone. She wiped away a running tear. And I understood. Public vulnerability isn't weakness. It's power. It's the strongest weapon we have against stigma, against silence, against shame. The cab continued through the city, and I knew that this decision to open up had caused waves that went far beyond social media, reaching even the people closest to her, whom she had kept at a distance for so long. The cab turned onto a quieter street, and Selena was silent for a few moments, as if gathering the strength to talk about something even more intimate. "You know what's funny? I was opening up to the entire world, but I still maintained distance with my own family," she confessed. "My parents knew I had health problems, but I hid the real depth. I thought I was protecting them, sparing them the pain. But in reality, I was building walls between us." She described family dinners where she smiled, pretended to be fine, and dodged questions about how she was truly feeling. "I would return home after those gatherings exhausted, not from being with them, but from the constant performance of being okay. The turning point happened one specific night. My mom called and asked if I was okay, like she always did. And for the first time, I answered the truth. "No, Mom, I'm not okay," Selena recounted, her voice cracking. There was a silence on the other end of the line, and then she started crying, not from sadness, but from relief. She said, "I knew. I always knew, but you never let me in." That moment broke years of barriers. She caught the first flight and showed up at my door. Not to judge me, not to tell me what I should do, just to be present. Her mother's unconditional presence during those difficult days rebuilt something Selena thought she had lost forever. Selena started having honest conversations with her family about what she was really going through. I explained what bipolar disorder was, how it worked, what my triggers were, how they could help, she reported. My dad, who has always been the quiet type, sat down with me and said, "I don't completely understand, but I'm here. You don't have to go through this alone." She smiled for the first time that night as she remembered. It was liberating, because for the first time I didn't have to pretend to be perfect to be loved. I could be broken, vulnerable, imperfect, and still be accepted. The cab drove past a square where families were eating dinner at restaurants, laughing together, and Selena watched that scene with a soft nostalgia. The reconciliation brought practical changes, too. My mom started going with me to doctor's appointments when I needed her to, Selena recounted. My dad learned about the medications I was taking, the side effects, the precautions. My siblings created a group chat where everyone checked in on me, but without pressure, without invasion. She explained how that family network became one of the most solid pillars of her recovery. On bad days, when I couldn't get out of bed, my mom would simply sit next to me and just be there. She didn't try to fix me. She didn't give unsolicited advice. She just stayed. The simplicity of that gesture held immeasurable power. Selena looked out the window and saw a little girl walking hand in hand with her dad, swinging a red balloon. "I completely redefined what home means," she said. "It's not a physical place. It's not a beautiful house with expensive furniture. Home is where you can take off the mask and breathe. It's where you can fall apart and know someone will help you pick up the pieces." She turned to me. "And you know what changed? When I stopped trying to be the perfect daughter, the perfect sister, I became a real person, and real people build true connections." As the cab moved forward, I realized that this entire journey of pain and healing hadn't just been about survival, but about finding a greater purpose that would transform all of it into something meaningful for the world. The conversation was reaching a crucial point when Selena picked up the envelope from her purse again and held it with both hands. "After going through all this, I reached a crossroads," she said. "I could keep this pain just to myself, use my platform only to sell music and products, stay on the surface, or I could turn all this suffering into something bigger, something that would make a real difference in the lives of other people." She chose the second path. I launched a beauty product line, but with a different mission. 1% of all sales went to mental health organizations. It sounds small, but we're talking about millions of dollars going directly to those who need it. The cab passed an illuminated storefront, and Selena observed her own reflection in the glass. She talked about the documentary she produced about her mental health journey. "It was one of the scariest things I've ever done," Selena admitted, "because it wasn't just talking about the topic, it was showing it. Cameras followed me to doctor's appointments, therapy sessions, moments of crisis, no makeup, no filters, no script. Her team was terrified of the idea of exposing so much. But I knew it was necessary, because people need to see that mental health isn't glamorous. It isn't aesthetic. It isn't something you resolve with a motivational post. The documentary reached millions of people and generated conversations in schools, families, and workplaces around the world. Selena also created educational programs about mental health. We went into public schools in underserved communities where many young people had never had access to information about mental health, let alone treatment, she explained. We taught teenagers how to identify signs of depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts. We taught them that seeking help is strength, not weakness. We connected these communities with free psychological care resources. Her eyes shone when she talked about this. "Because I had the privilege of having the money to pay for the best doctors, the best facilities. But what about those who don't? Who is suffering in silence because they can't afford an appointment? Those people deserve care too. The transformation didn't stop there. I used my voice to push for political changes regarding mental health, Selena said with conviction. I went to congressional hearings, talked to lawmakers, participated in campaigns to increase public funding for mental health programs. She knew that when a celebrity speaks, it carries weight. It has reach. It opens doors that ordinary people can't open. And if I have this privilege, this platform, why not use it for something that truly matters? I could be posting bikini pictures to get likes, or I could be fighting so that no child has to suffer in silence like I did. The choice was obvious to her. The cab turned onto a quieter street, and Selena finally genuinely smiled. You know what I discovered? That purpose isn't something you find. It's something you build from your pain, your experience, your scars. She looked at her own hands, as if seeing the power they carried for the first time. Every person who thanks me for speaking openly, every life that was saved because someone decided to seek help after hearing my story, that is bigger than any Grammy, any award, any #1 on the charts. The cab was approaching the Hudson River, and I knew we were reaching the end of that night journey, where everything would conclude with a deep reflection on healing, time, and hope. The cab finally stopped by the Hudson River. Selena asked me to turn off the engine for a few minutes. Can I stay here just a little longer? She asked, and I nodded. We got out of the car and stood there, looking at the city lights reflected on the dark water. The cold wind cut across our faces, but she didn't seem to mind. I come here when I need to breathe, when I need to remember that I'm small compared to something bigger, she said, her eyes fixed on the horizon. This river was already here before me. It'll be here after. And somehow, that calms me. It reminds me that my problems, however big they seem, are temporary. Life goes on. The river keeps flowing. Selena touched the scar on her neck again, that gesture she repeated whenever she talked about difficult things. These marks never go away, she said quietly. The surgical scar, the emotional marks of the mental breakdown, the memory of the days I wanted to give up on everything. They stay. They are part of who I am now. She turned to me. And you know what? I don't want to erase them anymore. Because every scar tells a story of survival. Every mark is proof that I fought and won, even when I thought I couldn't. The sound of the waves gently hitting the shore created a perfect soundtrack for that confession. She talked about how she learned to redefine the concept of healing. For years, I thought healing meant going back to who I was before all this happened, Selena explained. But that's impossible. You can't erase experiences, traumas, illnesses. They transform you. They break you and rebuild you differently. She picked up a small stone from the ground and threw it into the water, watching the ripples spread out. Healing isn't going back to the starting point. It's learning to live well with who you've become. It's making peace with your limitations, with your scars, with your imperfections. The wisdom of those words came from someone who had paid the highest price to learn them. Her wishes for the future were both simple and profound. I want to wake up tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow, and the day after that, she said with raw sincerity. I want to keep taking my medication, doing my therapy, building my support network. I want to have bad days without feeling guilty about them. I want to have good days without being afraid that they'll end. She crossed her arms, protecting herself from the cold. I want to see more people talking openly about mental health without fear of being judged. I want no child to go through what I went through alone, in silence, thinking it's a flaw. There was a firm hope in those words, built on years of pain and rebuilding. Selena looked at me one last time before getting back into the cab. Thank you for listening to me today, she said. Sometimes we just need to speak out loud to process everything inside us, and you gave me that space. I simply smiled and replied that it was an honor. As the cab pulled away from that quiet bank of the Hudson River, carrying her back to the busy life that awaited her, one truth remained with me. Healing isn't a final destination where everything is resolved and turns into constant happiness. Healing is the daily path of choosing to continue, of naming your pain, of asking for help, of transforming scars into wisdom, and of remembering that even on the darkest days, the river keeps flowing, the city keeps breathing, and tomorrow is always a new chance to start over. When this ride ends, the part that truly matters begins, what you do with everything you've heard. It's no use just being moved by Selena's story if, in practice, you continue hiding your own scars, pretending strength where exhaustion, silence, and fear truly exist. Mental health professionals emphasize that seeking help early can prevent the worsening of symptoms and open up treatment paths that many people don't even know exist. So look honestly at your life. What is the area where you've been insisting on going it alone when it's really high time to call someone into the driver's seat of your story? A therapist, a trusted friend, a family member, a support group? Now the choice is literally in your hands. Are you going to let this conversation die here, or are you going to transform this impact into concrete action? What small decision can you make today? Schedule an appointment, send a message asking for help, log off social media for a few hours, write down what you're feeling in a journal, to start taking care of those invisible scars that no one sees, but that you carry every day. Let me know in the comments what resonated with you most in this story, and what step you decide to take starting now. That might inspire someone who is at their limit and needs to read exactly what you have to say. And if this content made sense to you, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and share this video with anyone who needs this reminder. Emotional healing isn't a magical destination. It's a path we choose to walk one day at a time.